What's up there, Workforce? Chris here with Work to Game, and I want to talk a little bit about streaming platforms and the importance they have to games, especially games long-term like Final Fantasy, like World of Warcraft. And we can see it in the example of Wolcen most real-time. And so we're talking mostly about the known platforms. So what we anticipate xCloud feeling like when it's out here in full form, what we expect Stadia to become in its full form. We know that its early access has been underwhelming in the number of games they can bring to us, underwhelming in the number of players that it's impacted, but that the concept is very lofty and could really change gaming. And then nvidia GeForce Now, probably the most viable thing to actually change your life, in that with the 90-day trial, the ability to bring all your games there, you don't buy any of them. And then of course Shadow PC, that we're biased to because they approached us to have an affiliate deal with them, and so we always have their links down in our description. We mention them on our podcast because we've had a great experience with them. But we've always tried to make that known, it's going to be heavily based on you and your location. We know that one of their many server locations happens to be in the DFW area. We live in the DFW area, and we both have very good internet connections at our homes. And so, of course, we have fairly good experiences. And that's the importance of trials, with NVIDIA GeForce Now leading the way with a 90-day free trial right now. That's incredible. So until Stadia becomes stably free for everybody, NVIDIA GeForce Now takes the cake in pricing. So, what's the problem? First of all, people don't like change. We saw resistance to change when we moved from DVD to Blu-ray and HD. We saw resistance to change when we moved to digital downloads, which are now the majority of the industry. We saw and still see resistance to changing monetization strategies, and eventually we'll land on one that we all seem to be okay with, just based on past trends. And now we're seeing this resistance to, I will never play on a streaming platform. And you have to be careful with the word never, because there was a time when people said cars would never be better. There was a time when people said air travel would never be better. Never's a long time. And so you want to leave yourself room there for when it's possible that you weren't wrong, you simply didn't have all of the information. And so as the information changed, your viewpoint changed. It doesn't really mean past you was making a bad decision or you're wrong. You're saying, based on everything I know now, I'm not interested in streaming platforms. That's a better way to say that. I know it's a little wordier, but saying never, it can make you look silly long term when the information changes so drastically that it justifies changing your viewpoint on something. That also goes with supporting studios. I'll never play a Blizzard game. I'll never play an EA game. I'll never play. Be careful with the word never. That's just give them room and say, okay, but here's the huge list it would take to fix that. And I don't think that they're headed in that direction. Okay, that's fair. But what if they do? What if Diablo 4 is the most incredible, consumer-friendly, wonderful to play game experience ever? You're just going to pass on that? No, you're not. So at least for the majority of gamers, maybe there's a handful of people who really will just go to their grave not doing something because they said they wouldn't, even though there's no legitimate reason to do that. So streaming platforms, and talking about why they're good for gaming and why right now they're being threatened, it's a good thing that's dying. And it's struggling. It's being strangled out of the gate by a resistance to change. And it's doing it on both ends. Consumers are resisting it because we resist change that we're afraid, especially that takes away our power. So taking away a physical copy, while we all know that terms of service says things like you never technically own the intellectual property, I can pick up a physical disc up there off my shelf. I can put it in a physical system that I own, and I can run N64 games on a console that's no longer supported with a game made by people who are no longer in business, and it still runs and I still enjoy my experience. So whether or not legally I own the content of that disc, we can talk about as an abstract concept, but in reality here, in just physical space, effectively I do own it. I put it in the console, I boot it up, I play it. I own it. It's mine. I can enjoy it at my pace whenever I want, and nobody can affect that as long as I still own that physical copy and that physical set of consoles. Streaming is a little bit scarier, especially when you talk about things like Stadia, where your game ownership is locked into a platform, and that platform is not a physical thing that you own, right? It's servers that they own. And so if they ever shut those servers down or make those servers no longer accessible to you in any way, either lock them behind a price wall or whatever, they take everything that you've built on that side of the wall with them. And so you lose all those games. So that's why consumers are typically resistant. But that doesn't explain to me why we would be resistant of Shadow PC, NVIDIA, GeForce Now, and xCloud, really. Because all three of those, you're retaining game ownership in the same state that you have it today. So if you buy a game on your Xbox digitally, you'll have it on xCloud. If you buy a game on Steam, you can go play it on GeForce Now. If you buy any game on any digital store anywhere, you can play it on Shadow PC, because Shadow PC, of the four that I've named, is literally just a PC. I can have word processors on there. I could edit videos on there if I have the space. I can install anything that I can go to a website and download because I have the rights to. So I can go open up any launcher. I can open up Steam or the Epic Store or the Battle.net launcher right there on my Shadow PC, and I can install it, assuming it's within terms of service. So Battle.net launcher specifically says don't do that. But all the other ones, I really haven't seen that many having a problem with it. But we're starting to see that list increase, right? And we're seeing it most notably with NVIDIA GeForce Now, which makes sense because the first guy through the door always gets hit the hardest. And I don't mean first in calendar time, I mean the first to get noticed. And NVIDIA GeForce Now is blowing up. Shadow PC is still limited in many areas, and here in North America, they cannot give you extended hard drive space. They are still relatively pricey, so if you're comparing it to buying a brand new top-of-the-line gaming PC every year, it's a great deal, and I encourage you to try it. But if you're just wanting to test it out, outside of our code down below, like giving you a reasonable level of access to it, there's no way to like just turn it on and off at a very small amount of money. So it's expensive. Stadia only has 120 games, and while 120 is probably more games than any one of us plays in a year, what are the sheer odds across the total game library that that 120 has all the games you play? I play anywhere between 1 and 5 games at a time in a given 30-day period. What are the odds that 120 includes all of mine? Especially when I know for a fact that some of mine don't like running on streaming platforms. And so integrating with them is going to be a problem. Stadia requires a total recoding of the game. It's not just drag and drop. So Stadia also kind of gets pushed out, so we don't worry about it. NVIDIA xCloud, we don't know enough about. There will probably be others, just like streaming services. But NVIDIA GeForce Now has come out incredibly well. You take all your existing game library right over. A ton of games are supported on it. It's a huge library, and it actually feels like it's getting smaller, not bigger. And until devs started pulling, which we'll talk about in a second here, it was incredibly exciting to see how fast it could grow, because it really is just a drag and drop gaming-oriented PC in the cloud, and it's available to you for 90 days for free. And then after that, it's only $5 a month. So if your graphics card is good enough to run games, but not good enough to run a specific game, whether that be the upcoming Cyberpunk, or that be Wolcen, or that be, you know, anything out there right now that's challenging for any outdated hardware, you can keep your PC intact to play all the games you've already been playing on it, and then you can pay $5 a month additionally after 90 days of trying it for free to play the games this year. And that feels like, wow, I mean, at the cost of a graphics card, at the cost of, you know, a processor, at the cost of whatever component of your computer is holding you back right now, I could kind of pay for a whole year for less than that component. And so maybe I'll just let my computer go until it can't play other things too, and then I'll have GeForce Now for specifically these high-end titles. And that's something really unique. It doesn't offer the power of Shadow PC if you want to play games modded, if you want to stream. I can actually stream from my Shadow PC, so I can boot up Shadow. So like for my use case, Shadow PC is still a way better thing. But NVIDIA GeForce Now for the average consumer is incredibly intriguing. And so it has grown in popularity rapidly. And with the free 90-day trial, those numbers can be incredibly inflated. And so it got the notice of devs. Now, devs have pulled out of Shadow PC. There are many devs that are pulling out. And the reason they would pull out when you go look at all these different platforms is these streaming services get lumped in with other platforms. They get lumped in with Steam, they get lumped in with the Epic Store, they get lumped, and the reason they get lumped in is because sometimes they are lumped in. xCloud will likely feel by the time it's done like an extension of Xbox Live. We're going to have Xbox Live, and we're going to have xCloud, and we're going to have Game Pass, and it's all going to be lumped in here, and you're kind of just going to go in there and you're going to pick a subscription fee, and it's going to just kind of pay for certain features. And that's likely the integration that's going to make that feel so seamless. Oh, you want your thing to do a little bit more? No problem. Just pay this little bit more, or just give us this little bit more of your data, or however they price it, and we'll just make it better. Awesome. xCloud is poised to be probably the most powerful out of the set because of the infrastructure that it's being built on top of. But when you compare that to something like Stadia, you're just buying it inside there, and there is a revenue split. And so when they compare that to something like the Epic Store that gives an incredibly friendly split to devs, or the Steam Store that gives you an incredibly large base of players to go to, so while the split now may not be as well, you're able to get a lot more copies of the game out there from one platform. You naturally look at Shadow PC, and you naturally look at nvidia GeForce Now, and you say, that's going to be more of the same thing, right? I don't remember them contacting me for a split. I don't want them to have access to my game because they're not paying me. And so that's the first thing that I would see. That's just a lack of education, right? That's all that is. That's just a lack of awareness of how these are working. And that's probably on Shadow PC and nvidia GeForce Now to get that information out there. And I don't know how they do that, but it's probably on them to go out and educate the devs that we're not what you think we are. We're not trying to disseminate ownership. We're not trying to allow illegal copies of your game to run any more than they would run on people's PCs. We are literally just like hardware. We don't sell your game. We don't have any ownership of your game. We don't encourage any bad behavior within your game any more than any other platform. We are literally just like the hardware aspect. We are just like the Xbox as a console, not the Xbox as a brand. We are just like the PC as a thing that somebody builds and has in their home next to their desk. We are identical to that. We don't retain any ownership of your game. If somebody buys it off platform, that's where you make your money. We are literally just there. And the reason I think that that's important to get that information out there is because once you think about it like that, they are great for devs. Because when you have devs building things like Wolfson and like I think Cyberpunk 77 will be and all of that, not every game can be the beauty that we're expecting out of Final Fantasy VII and that come out of Unreal Engine 4 and run on base level consoles. Some of the things that these games are attempting require so much computing power that they either won't run on a person's machine or they will run suboptimally. And GeForce Now gives that person access to that top level gameplay right from the get-go. When I go out and Google greed shrines and some of these crazy things going on in Wolfson, and all I see is crash report after crash report after crash report, and nobody's telling me how they work, and I'm like, man, my game hasn't crashed at all. Then I realize I'm playing in a cloud PC. My PC is top-end specs. And next year, mine won't be top-end specs, but a year old, it'll be top-end specs still. So if they update the game to make it even crazier, I'll keep up. The year after that, a new game comes out, challenges things even further. I won't have a 2-year-old computer. I'll have a Shadow PC. I'll still have top-end specs. And so I'll always be able to play the best, which devs have only built for a small percentage of the population to have access to. And that percentage can grow because now for $5 a month, we can all gain access to it. If you want to have a modded experience and have the ability to edit and stream and all that, you can go pay Shadow PC's prices, which are a lot higher than $5. You can do that. And it's incredibly empowering. But it doesn't hurt the dev in any way. It only empowers gamers. It gives me the ability. I keep a really powerful Mac, and that's what I edit on. But that makes it really hard for PC-only games to be my focus because, unfortunately, I just don't have the resources to keep an up-to-date Mac and up-to-date PC sitting at my desk. I just don't. Maybe one day I'll be wealthier than I am now, and that'll be a focus of mine. But today it's not. And so to play games on PC, Shadow PC makes that possible for me. All of my PC-only games I play in the cloud. Now, thank goodness for the big games I play, like World of Warcraft, they run on Mac. But not all games do. And some games, like Final Fantasy, the Mac client, in many times over the history of the Mac client, has not run as well. There are times that it's run well, and there are times that it has not. And so my view on the Mac client has changed patch over patch over patch. The move to 64-bit was huge, but that will eventually wear off, and the Mac client won't run as well as my PC client in the cloud or as my PS4 client. And yes, I have all 3 clients. So I think that kind of shifts to the next thing. Why else would devs not like this? Let's assume devs understand that they're not giving up any ownership by allowing the game to run on GeForce Now. Well, the only other thing I can think of is negotiating power. If they believe that they are going to be paid a good split by xCloud or Stadia or whoever does make money off their game by it running on their platform, that streaming thing, right, that service is saying, okay, well, how much of the market can we reasonably expect to take on? Because anybody that wants to run the game at average specs or below will just do it wherever they've already been doing it. So they'll just do it on their existing old console. They'll do it on their existing aging PC, right? But we have the corner on the 4K 60 frame market because only a very small percentage of users can afford physical hardware that can keep up with that. And so for everybody else that wants that pinnacle of experience but can't afford the buy-in price, there's only a handful of ways to get there, and they are all streaming services. Stadia is promising to get there. GeForce Now, Shadow PC, I would not be shocked to get there. xCloud's promising to get there, right? These are incredible experiences. Yes, the Series X will get there on its own, but only for things that run on the Series X. So if you want to get to the absolute pinnacle of things, especially when we start to talk about games that are designed for hardware that's not meant to be personally owned. So it's designed for streaming services, either with integrations like what they've talked about with Baldur's Gate, or with actually just, what's it called? Orcs something. On the Stadia, where they said they were able to put an amount of monsters in the game that would never run on a PC because the Stadia can just spin up more resources to throw at it. So we can start to have games that require 3 graphics cards, 4 graphics cards, 5 graphics cards. Doesn't matter because the streaming service can just assign that. And for everybody on a game that doesn't require that, they can divvy up graphics cards. And so they can just work out that math and put it into their monthly cost. So when they go out to those platforms and Stadia offers them money, xCloud offers them money, they say, okay, but you know that our top-end, highest-end settings are only going to run on yours and a handful of the top-end players. And so you feel like you're entitled to a bigger piece of the pie. But if all of a sudden all these people are playing on GeForce Now for $5, xCloud's like, yeah, but we got to go steal them from xCloud. That's on us. I'm not going to pay you for legwork I have to do. So the only other thing we can think about is it could be a negotiating tactic. But otherwise, I don't see a reason for it. And I think that competition is what's driving the streaming space to improve so fast. It's improving unbelievably fast. 5 years ago, it was not viable at all. And now we are talking about multiple platforms, and we talk about failures and successes, and they're changing month over month. That's incredible. And the thing killing streaming services are devs and consumers, the two people that stand to benefit the most from streaming services. When we look at MMOs, which is the core of what Brian and I play and cover here on the channel, and it's taken me 18 minutes to get to this point. Final Fantasy, World of Warcraft are primed to be an incredible experience on a streaming service, whether that be a bespoke one built for them and you just log into Final Fantasy streaming service, or that be piggybacking off the back end of somebody else. It runs on xCloud, it runs on Stadia, it runs on whatever, right? A full streaming service. I don't mean a remote PC like what GeForce Now and Shadow PC are. That's still technically centered on the traditional concept of running a client, though that client may be more resource intensive. Stadia actually is doing something very different. Your client is a much smaller piece of the pie, and the server is effectively where your client lives, and so the server aspect of the game can get a lot bigger. You can start to have a lot more things being rendered on the server, and then the client is just a viewport into that. And you can start to have things like 1,000-person lobbies, 5,000-person lobbies, 10,000-person lobbies. And it's just a question of the math. And so when we talk about MMOs, when we look at like Final Fantasy and you have to load zone to zone to zone, on Stadia you wouldn't have to. There's no reason for that. The reason you do it is because your computer, right, they want this game to be able to run on PlayStations and things like that. And so the zones have to be only a certain size. And yes, the zones have gotten larger as we've gone to better hardware. So now that we've dropped PS3 support, expansions since PS3 support have gotten bigger zones that are prettier. But if you want to take a huge step forward, go run a version of Final Fantasy on Stadia. There are no zones. There are no load times. You just go there. You just click and you just go there. And that's incredible. Input latency is something that will get better with time. Internet bandwidth per user is just infrastructure. That's not necessarily, that's not the same aspect of Google. I understand Google is in the infrastructure market, but that's a different division. So that's not Stadia's fault or problem. That's just something that will improve. Just like designing a car that can go 200 mile an hour. Our road system really doesn't support that, but the roads will improve given time. Self-driving technology, right? Build the technology, the infrastructure will come. So I think that the biggest issue I'm having with streaming is that streaming is killing itself right now, and that doesn't benefit anybody. So I just wanted to kind of talk about some of the core things and kind of get people's heads starting to spin in that direction if you haven't taken the time to think about it, and why it's good for gamers and why it's good for devs, and why when we see something like 2K adding to the list of things pulling out of GeForce Now, that's a mistake, and that if we're going to tweet about anything today, it should be, I want to see more games on these services, not less. Why is Activision Blizzard still running an unfriendly policy towards those? There was a time when they were using that to control bogus copies of the game running, when they were using that to control, because they can do like hardware bans and things like that. And if you move people to streaming platforms, hardware bans disappear as a tool they can use to dissuade people that are exploiting. So, I get that. But those times have evolved and we've gotten a lot better at things, and you have better partners now, right? So you can have GeForce Now held accountable, just like advertising companies hold YouTube accountable. So you can have a exploit apocalypse if they're not doing their job. But if they are doing their job, then just let it be. It's improving the number of gamers. It's improving the infrastructure in the space. That's it for me, guys. My name's Chris with Work to Game. I hope that you guys found that interesting. It just seemed like a nice let's discuss topic while I kind of work on some guides and everything. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And thank you so much for hanging out. Hope you guys are having a great weekend, and I'll see you next time.